Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Vessel. Welcome to Politics and Plastic. Today, I am joined by my co-host of the Exterminatus podcast, or I guess I'm your co-host, not the other way around. Eric Kakasi. Did I say it right?
You did it right.
Got
Great
it.
job.
So I've been practicing all week on how to say Eric's last name because it's been quite a challenge for me. Eric, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Honored to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining me today. I'm excited to get into our topic. Before we do, I just have a few quick announcements to make, which I wrote down because I'm a very organized human being these days. So the first announcement I just wanted to quickly make is that um, this show and all the shows that I'm doing are available on podcast form. I've been getting a few questions about where else they could listen to the show. So if you guys search for the best overall show on Google Play, Apple, Spotify, you'll find the show. And all three of the shows that I'm doing on a weekly basis are available on various podcast apps. If it's not available on an app that you're looking for, just shoot me a DM and I can add it. There's a trillion podcast apps and stuff, and so I only really go to like the main ones. But if there's one that you really really like that you wish the show was on, just please let me know. Please make sure to like and subscribe this show if you guys are enjoying the content. It really helps me out. I'm around 700 subscribers, and I'm trying to get really hard to get to 1,000. So it'd be really helpful. A lot of you, about half of you who are listening to this show or watching this show on YouTube, aren't subscribers. So please make sure to follow me on Twitch. It's absolutely free. And subscribe and hit the little bell icon on YouTube. That'd be very helpful. And then last thing, like I do every show, I never bury the lead. So today we're going to be talking about Ela ratings in 40K. But next week I have Rob Symes on, the Honest Wargamer, and we're going to be talking about the ethics of sponsorship. So if you guys are enjoying these conversations, these kind of longer form conversations about a single topic, make sure to tune into the show next Tuesday. And it's going to be a special time. I still have to confirm the time. It'll probably be a little bit earlier because Rob is in the UK, and I think it's around the normal time that I would have the show would be probably like midnight where he is, and I wouldn't do that to him. So it'll probably be a slightly earlier show, but tune in next week for that show, and I'm excited to bring you guys that conversation. It's something that I've really been looking forward to get into because this is going to be a show, and as some of you that may have watched the best overall show yesterday, or sorry, competitive corner yesterday, I will probably never take sponsorships on this show just because I want to be able to speak my mind honestly and truthfully, and that's really really important to me. That being totally not necessarily uncensored. It's not like I want to turn this into some sort of big cuss fest, but being able to kind of speak my mind honestly and bluntly and say how I feel without any fear of losing a sponsor or upsetting people. I always want to make sure that this show is the straight truth and the honest opinion that I have, and that we're never relying on sponsors. So that's all the announcements. With that said, I want to introduce Eric. So Eric, maybe you could just tell everyone about yourself a little bit. I know you, but tell our audience who you are. Anything you might. I know you're a TO of renown. You're the founder of the Exterminatus podcast. You've been in this for a million years, but maybe tell our audience a little bit about yourself first.
Yeah, I've been playing since, unfortunately, second edition, so I was really old. I was the guy going to tournaments with the 4 pages of my White Dwarf. I was playing Necrons pre-Codex. As mentioned, TO of renown. I've been running tournaments since third edition, so I've got a lot of experience in running tournaments, running conventions. So I've got a good side of both being a player, both as a tournament player as well as running the tournaments. And so this was a topic that was right up my alley. Really excited to see how this all works. It was one of the first ITC tournaments we ran here in our local area. I'm based out of Phoenix. So we've got a lot of experience with the ITC, and good to see that the circuit is growing. I've seen some of the other previous circuits kind of fall upon themselves and kind of fell apart. So it's nice to see it's all kind of coming together. But I think there's some other tools that'll be very helpful for a lot of players and TOs, and we're going to talk about that today.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good introduction. And as some of you may know or may not know, me and Eric do a weekly show called the Exterminatus Podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about the Exterminatus Podcast, what it is, how it started, and where people can find the show?
Sure.
Even though I could tell them probably, but I'll let you do it.
Yep, we've been here for almost 3 years now. Our episode 180 will be recorded this. We focus on the competitive scene. We look at what are the events that happened the previous week. We look at the impacts. So we kind of look at not only whether the top players playing, look at the lists that they're running. We look at larger events. We also look at trends in terms of things that are happening throughout the hobby that would affect the competitive scene. So we do that on a weekly basis. Jim is one of our co-hosts. Ray is my other co-host. It was originally his idea, and I did some podcasting in the past. And he says, "Hey, let's do this." And it's been a
Yeah, so if you
Great
guys are
ride so
not
far.
sick of me already, there is actually a fourth show that I do that you can find me on the internet. So for those of you that aren't sick of me yet. All right, so let's get into our subject. And the question is for today's Politics and Plastic is, should 40K adopt ELO ratings? Now, before we get into that topic, I think it obviously makes sense to kind of take a look at where we are today as far as the current ranking system and the point of like ranking in general and why we think this is important, and then also talk about what ELO ratings are, because a lot of people that might be listening have no idea what we're talking about when we say ELO ratings. And also, and I'm going to use the word term ELO and Glyco kind of interchangeably. They're kind of two similar systems, and we'll maybe get into a little bit about the differences. But essentially, it is an alternative ranking system than what we're using currently, which is the ITC. And so yeah, so Eric, do you want to maybe tell people or maybe I can, a little bit about the current ITC system and kind of how it works, or how we rank players currently.
Sure. So I can get that started. Yeah. So the way it works is the overall how you do in a tournament. You would get so many points. So if you come in first, you get the most points. If you come in last, you get fewer points. But you always get points for showing up. So definitely, the current system is incentivizing you to play lots of tournaments. They also have caps in terms of you need to attend so many big events, so many small events. For example, they take your best 6 scores. So if you had a bad run for a while, uh, those scores can be replaced if you have a good run towards the end of the season. They take your best 6
Right.
scores, but they're only going to take up to 3 of your RTT size. We'll explain that in a second. Up to, I believe, you need at least 2 GT scores and at least 1 major to
Right.
complete your 6 scores.
And
those levels are based off of the attendance of the event.
right.
So anything less than 28 players in a one-day event, it's an old term. It's what Games Workshop used to use back in the 3rd and 4th edition. The Rogue Trader Tournament. That's where that comes from.
Right. And
GT is a what's that?
right, sorry, and I was going to mention, just for those of you that aren't aware, so RTTs are generally up to 28 players. GTs are anything from, I think, around 28 to 60. Is that correct?
56.
It's 56.
Yeah.
And then 56, I think, to like 128 is just majors, and now there's this new category of super majors for tournaments in 40K. And I'm not quite sure. I haven't looked at the rankings because I haven't been playing since they've implemented all these new rules. But are you required 1 super major now to get your 6th ITC score, or is 6 majors enough? Do you know that?
6.
Okay. So essentially, what the ITC does, and just to kind of summarize the ITC scoring system, it's a way of essentially tracking your historical performance. And there's a few kind of, I guess, quirks to the system, which is first, it's not actually a representation of your current ability because of the fact that, as you mentioned, Eric, it looks at your 6 best scores, not your 6 most recent scores. So if, for instance, like myself in the 2019 season, you had a really good, strong start to the season, and then maybe change lists or your army got nerfed and you didn't play as much in the end of the season, it didn't really matter because your 6 best scores are taken. So it is not a picture. It's not like a snapshot of the current moment in time. It's more of a overall kind of like ranking based off your historical performance in that season. Would that be accurate? Would you like?
That'd be very accurate.
Right.
So we've seen that past 2017. There was a player, he managed to squeeze in 5 events in 4 months before a FAQ came out and pretty much nerfed his army. And that was enough to get him into the top 25 until LVO.
Right.
He basically never took the podium for the rest of the year.
Right. And then the other thing about the ITC system, and of course, we just want to explain how the system works before we get into the ELO system, is that it rewards, so you get more points the larger the event. So what that does is twofold. First, it encourages larger events, right? Not just from it encourages players to want to attend larger events, and it encourages TOs to want to run larger events because players are going to be wanting those points. So they're going to want to go to the largest events possible. And obviously players generally have limited budgets, so they can't go to every event. So over say 20 events, if I know that there's 20 events happening, say that I'd be reasonably to travel to, I'm going to want to go, and I'm only going to go to 5 of them. I'm going to want to go to the largest 5. I'm not going to want to go to the smallest 5. And so as a player, I'm incentivized to go to those larger events. And as a TO, because I know the players want to go to larger events to get the most points, I'm incentivized to run larger events. And so you have this kind of system that actually feeds back into itself, where TOs run larger events that bring players to go to those events that make them want to do more larger events. And we're going to talk about one of the downsides, and I know we talked about this on Sunday. Yeah, so that's something that we're going to guys, it's ELO, right? It's ELO rating. It's not ELO, because ELO is actually the last name of the person that invented it. It's not a acronym for something. I believe it's ELO. ELO? Is it ELO?
I've heard both. It's definitely
Well,
the
it's
guy's
3
last
letters.
name.
So
Has
I mean,
nothing to do
how
with
does it? Is it ELO though? Let me see this.
It needs to. We'll look that up for you.
You guys are
Yeah,
jerks.
it's after named after Arpad Low, who was a Hungarian-American physics professor.
Okay, maybe you guys are right. I'm just trying to say it a way that it pronounces. So there's no phonetic pronunciation here. So I will say ELO if it makes you guys happy.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with the 70s prog rock band. So.
I'm just trying to see here. Okay. Anyways, you guys are throwing off the show now. But anyways, also ELO from now on if it makes you guys happy. I don't believe anything that the English say, because the city of Leicester is, if you've seen the way that it's pronounced and spelt, it's like two totally different things. So anytime an English person tells me how to pronounce something, I just don't believe them, because they pronounce things that are very phonetic, obviously how to pronounce them phonetically, totally different than what they're actually spelt like. So I take anything that the English says with a grain of salt. All right, so let's call them ELO ratings moving forward. There's also the Glyco system, which is something we're going to talk about. So just to kind of recap on the ITC. So the ITC rewards larger events, and it requires you to play a certain minimum amount of events, and it doesn't actually matter who you play during these events. So that's another thing about the ITC system. It's completely blind to your actual skill level of your opponent. So you could theoretically play 6 large events in your local area, get a very high ITC score as a result, and that would not actually be a true metric, or true, I guess, measurement of your skill level, essentially, because it has nothing to do with who you actually played. It has everything to do with the size of the event, and it has to do with the number of events, right? So that would be another thing. Does that sound about right?
That
All
sounds
right.
right.
So let's get into ELO ratings. So explain to the what is an ELO rating, how does it differ, and why do we think? Yeah, let's get into that. So can we explain the ELO rating?
Yeah. Short version, the way to describe it is it's a rating system. So each player will be assigned a number, and depending on the higher the number, the higher your skill level.
Right.
And how is that determined? As you play other players, depending on what their skill level is. So, for example, if I'm playing somebody with a much higher ELO rating, like a better ELO rating, if I beat this person, my ELO rating will go up significantly.
Right.
Conversely, the guy who has a much higher rating than he won't get as should be. Other way around, if I lose the match, well, I was supposed to lose the match. He's got a higher rating. I will lose some points from my ELO rating, but it won't be as much because I was expected to lose.
Right.
So it gives you an idea of who are the top players. So you're incentivized to play tougher competition.
Right. So the whole point of the ELO rating is that it's actually comparing, rather than comparing, who has who's played the most events or the largest events. It's comparing who's played the best players and beat the best players, regardless of the size of events. Right? Was that accurate? All right.
That is
so
correct. So
let's talk about it. So what do we like about the ITC system, and what do we don't like? And what do we like about the ELO system, and what do we don't like? So I'll go first, and I think this is something that I actually think is very salient, especially now. Two big things that I don't like about the ITC system, because it encourages larger events and pushes TOs to run these larger events. Oftentimes that comes at the expense of the quality of the event. So we're seeing, we saw some games from the Dallas GT this weekend, right? Where the train was not quite the way it wanted to be. We've had lots of horror stories from years past, the London GT 2 years ago, where TOs, in an effort to kind of present the largest ITC pool for their players, expanded their events too quickly, ran their events too large, and then as a result, the event quality suffers. So the terrain is not good, the venue is not good, or it's expensive, or it's it's too crowded. And so that's one thing that I think is actually really bad about the ITC system. And then the second thing is, right, especially right now, is it doesn't actually measure your skill level against other players. So depending on your win path or how you actually win those events, you could have a very high ITC score and not actually be that great of a player just because of the people that you've had to face or the local meta that you've accumulated those points in. So it's actually not a very good representation of your skill level or ability, right?
Absolutely. And we've seen that with certain tournaments. For example, Battle for Salvation up in New York. It's a smaller tournament. It's probably the GT level, but it is a murderer's row of
Right.
players in terms of making the realm. And there's some other GT levels, and actually a major that we saw. I want to say it was in North Dakota. For most players, that was probably their only entry to the ITC. So, are they bad players? I don't know. I don't have a big enough sample size. But if we're not seeing them on a regular basis, for winning that event, we're not sure who they've placed and who they've played.
Right.
So.
And one of the other things too, especially in this age of pandemic, and this is why I actually think the ELO ratings are the future, is that we can now, like right now, a lot of places cannot play events, or if they can, they have to be fairly small. And the thing is, because the ELO ratings are blind to the size of your event, obviously larger events means there's more players, which is more potential to kind of move through the rankings. The nice thing is, especially in this pandemic, with smaller events, like you're not like, you don't feel like you're pressure to run these massive 200, 300, 500 person GTs just to feel like people will come to your event. You can run a 20 to 30 person event or a 50 person event, and still it'll feel like it's worth it for your players to go. It's not going to feel like, oh, well, what's the point of going to this event because I'm not going to get any points.
You see that also in other group sports that use the ELO rating. They have tournaments that are based on you have to be within this range. Like you must have be this the ELO rating of this or higher to get into this event, or even this is more for a mid range. So that way you're also playing against sound competition. So sometimes playing a top player, you're not ready for that. So all you do is I lost. I guess I learned something from that. But by going to tournaments, I'm going to be in the same skill range as everybody else. It can be a better building experience and a better overall experience for the player. And right now we try to, you hear about all the time. There's a 40K champs and there's the 40K casual.
Right.
And I still don't know what does that mean. You wear a suit and tie to one, and you can wear jeans to the other. It's not very clear. Whereas with an ELO system, you could say, yeah, if you have a rating of higher than this, you can only play in the champs. Everyone else you can qualify for the casual.
Right. So what do you think? So maybe kind of take us through I know you've done a little bit of research and you want to present it, but maybe take us through why you think the ELO rating in general is superior system, and that we should actually switch over to it. Because I think a lot of players, and I'll give you some of the common, I guess, arguments against it, right? So the first one and the most common one is it's too complicated. So what do you say to people that say it's too complicated and there's too much bookkeeping?
So here's my big surprise for Jim. I went through every GT year to date for this season, took every player in there and calculated the ELO rating for the show. It took me by hand because I used a little website calculator for me. It took me 3 hours. I took the Dallas event from their results. It took me 15 minutes. And this is doing it with an Excel spreadsheet. So imagine if you actually had a true app built into it.
Right. And I mean,
it's not hard.
The thing I'd also say is like the way that we calculate ITC points currently, which is generally through the BCP app, right? That's already baked right in. So there's no reason that we couldn't also bake in the calculation for ELO rating. So once you've registered, you have an ELO rating attached to your account. And as you play opponents, all that math is done behind the scenes. Like the thing is, and my argument is, you don't need to know how it works. I mean, you might, all you really need to know is if you play players that are better than you, your score will generally, and beat them, your score will generally go up. And if you play players closer, and the higher they are from you, the higher it'll go up. And if they're close to you, it'll either go up slightly or down slightly, depending on when you win or lose. Outside of that, just like no one can really like calculate, and the ITC formula, like the algorithm that actually calculates like how ITC scores are distributed, is also proprietary. So it's not like people actually know how to calculate that by hand anyways, right? So we already have a system right now that is
Right.
doing all this math behind the scenes, and the only difference would be that we would switch it, and this is my argument, I actually think we should have both. Because the thing is, I still want to reward people as attendance, right? And I think it's actually interesting information to look at. So I always like more data when it comes to systems like that. And with an ELO rating, like you're gonna get some set of important information about like your ability versus other players. And then with the ITC, you're actually gonna be able to measure like tournament wins and like GT wins and like your overall kind of like winning record rather than your skill level, I guess. It's almost like you're measuring two different things.
Sure. And we see that already in sports. They use ELO ratings in football, hockey, basketball, soccer as well to get an idea of who are those teams that are competing at a higher level and who are punching above their weight. Who's really a Cinderella story, and who really should be doing better. They're dropping it to teams
Right.
they shouldn't be
So
losing to. So that we have two
right.
systems
So can
already
you
in place
take
that
us
can be
through the
done here.
data that you like tell me what you found in your data, because I'm curious.
Sure. All right, so let's start with a local example. You go to your local RTT, you got 16 players. And you already know when you walk in, it's probably going to be one of those two guys who's going to win it. It's always going to be in. Then you have the next two guys that if something happens to the other two guys, they like play each other in round two, and one of them's forced with a loss, they're going to have a chance of maybe perhaps pulling off the upset. So you go through your experience, and so game one, you win. You play a guy that you play every week. So you know how to play him. You're pretty good. Game two, you play one of those guys. You pull off the miracle upset. You're now 2-0. And then, well, you have to play the other guy, and you lose. So you end up going 2-1. You get in the car, and you're thinking you were that close to winning an RTT at this local store, and you find out your buddy, he's round one. He played the proverbial wooden spoon, so he got his easy win there. And then round two, he got a bye. And then round three, he played somebody and lost. So both of you are 2-1. The tiebreaker currently is based off of battle points. So basically both of you walked out with the same amount of ITC points because the points awarded is based on the 16 players that showed up, the attendance. If you went to an ELO system, because the guy who played the top players, he would have actually gotten more points because he's playing a tougher competition. So, for example, let's take Dallas GT for this weekend. Mark Eschke is a AdMech player. He went 6-2. So did about 40 other players of the Dallas GT. What makes him special? His only two losses were Nick Nanavati
That's
and
Mark
John
Admech.
Lennon.
I think he actually beat Nick.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was because he played
Okay,
John in the finals, so he was 7-1, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I got him. My point is that when you're playing tough competition, even when you take those, your scores keep going up, and you're rewarded for playing those tougher players. So as you're playing the tougher guys, and then as those tough guys, so we talk about that local system. Okay, the two guys that win every RTT, they went off to a big GT. Well, their scores go up because they're playing guys from out of town now. They come back to your local store because maybe you're not able to travel that much. When you play them again, your score can still go up because as their point level goes up from playing tougher competition. Now the good news is, as you get beat, you're supposed to lose, so you lose fewer points for losing to the tough guys. But boy, if you lose to the wooden spoon guy, yeah, your score's going to plummet. So it rewards you for beating the guys you're supposed to.
And so what did your data show? Like you said that you had calculated quite a bit of information. So like did it match what we're seeing in the ITC? Did it match performances? Like what was there any any kind of nuggets of information gleaned from the data that you calculated?
Yeah. So first thing, our current prior to the Dallas GT, Ryan Snyder was your number one player in the ITC. Based on his LO rating right now, he would be closer to 12
based
or
on
13.
That's pre Dallas GT. So the ITC was showing him his first place, but based on his ELO rating, sorry, he should have been actually closer to 12. Okay.
Right. So you can look at it two ways. One, you can also make that argument that, well, he won his first three RTTs, so he was 9-0, picked up a lot of points. And then he attended 3 GTs, but he basically only went 3 and 2 in all 3 of those GTs. So you can see the writing was on the wall. But the key thing, if you look at the ELO rating, so what I did is when I calculated this, I started everybody at 100,
Right.
the bare minimum. So if you guys Google ELO ratings, you see the chess masters are like 2,000, 3,000 points. Yeah, this is over a very small sample size. So work with me here. But Ryan, for example, after his first win, he went to the Clutch City GT. That was his first appearance. He bumped up all the way up to 160 points. So a pretty good leap from starting at 100. But then Glass City GT didn't do so well. He only went up to 163, 165 at the Fab Forgery of 5. And then the Wooden Battle for the Wooden Spoon only went up another point. So he was basically kind of just playing players at his level. He really wasn't exceeding where he was.
Sorry, and you'd imagine that if you're going like say around 500, right, which is you said you went around 3 and 2, your score shouldn't change a ton. So if you're playing around 500, right, I'd imagine your score, assuming the players are like close to your skill level, your score shouldn't really change that much. It shouldn't be jumping huge amounts, right?
Right, shouldn't. So let's take another person. So we'll take a John Lennon, for example. He won the Salt Classic, so he went from 100 to 200, like overnight. Fantastic. Then it was kind of off the beaten path. He played at DakaCon. Now, granted, he did drop out, so he didn't get a full score, but he didn't do well according to the stats. So then the score only went up to 203. Now with the big win at the Dallas GT, you look at the players that he's playing. He was picking up more points, beating the Sean Nage, going into the down all the way to 204.
Sorry, Eric, I just lost you there for a sec. Could you just repeat? You said he was getting more points doing what? Sorry.
Beating the tougher players. So he beat Sean Naden, who's going into Dallas GT, had an ELO rating well over 200. So John Lennon, as of now, if you based on ELO ratings just from GTs, would be your #1 player in the ITC.
Right. And that I guess that matches reality, right? That's not like a far fetch, right? And then who would be our #2 player?
So I'll do the whole top 10. So starting at number 10, David Uzawa. He spent some time in the ITC top 10 for the all season, right. So he'd be hanging at 10. Your current #1 prior to now Dallas GT hasn't updated yet is Jason McKenzie. He's down to number 9. David Robson in 8th. Mark Esch in 7th. Tyler DeVries in 6th. Colin McDade in 5th. Nick Nandavati in 4th. James Killing in 3rd. Sean Naden in 2nd. John Lennon in 1st.
Okay, so there's just a few. That's really interesting. And I think that actually matches up pretty close to what we're seeing. Kind of when they're all at an event, that's actually pretty close to the actual finishes, right? Like they're ending kind of close to that. There's just a few questions in chat. Tom Layton, he wanted to say that he remembers your work as part of the 11th company, specifically in the form of tactical terrain segments, and it was very much valued, and thank him for it. So he says it got him through college and university work back in the day.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate you guys remember that.
Shameless Soul is saying, is it reasonable to assume we should take lists into account over player? And also there's a question around different power level lists. But I think the argument at the end of the day is that, like, look, we're already incorporating that in current ITC ratings. Like already the people that are maybe winning events are doing them with better lists. So we already make the exception that we're not playing chess where everyone's got the equal sides. And even in chess, I think it's like 51% to 49% like white over black, I think. So, right. Caleb Garcia's asking who's going to house and pay for the housing, or who's going to house the data and pay for the housing. I mean, it wouldn't be any different than the BCP, which is what we're using now, and the ITC, which we're already using. So it would be in parallel system that would work with it. And although in a perfect world, Games Workshop would, that would be the answer to your question. That would be the ideal. Mm-hmm. And then just a few other questions we have. So.
Quick. You want to do it by faction also. It'd be interesting to see, okay, here's the ELO for the faction, then look at the player. If their ELO is below the faction ELO, then you can tell that a player is just riding a good list, as opposed to somebody who's kicking it with Genestealer Cult. We know that they are, well, we were told that they're bad. We can look at the ELO rating for Genestealer Cult, and this player is well above that average. Then this guy he's really good at this particular list. So I think there's something to be said.
And Brandon's asking, is he right in assuming someone could just grab the data from BCP and set it up? Yeah, of course. I mean, if the raw data is available, it could easily be set up. And I would kind of advocate for two things: a lifetime ELO rating, so this is like your lifetime rating, and then also a seasonal rating. So you'd have every season, like at the end of the LVO, you'd kind of have your seasonal rating, and then that would essentially reset at the start of every season. I think that would feel like, because I don't want to I don't think it would be good to have a system where you're forever fighting your old games. You know what I'm saying? So ideally,
Right.
you would play your season and you'd have a, say everyone starts at say 1200. I'm just going to use it as an example from chess at the start of the season, and then through the season it goes up and down, and then at the end of the season that's kind of merged into your lifetime score. So you have kind of a lifetime ELO rating, but then every season you start again. So the actual seasonal ITC is won by who has that season's best rating. So it's like you're not having to fight, someone's 3 seasons past that, like, got really high and kind of stayed that way by, like, and then on the other side, there'd be a fresh incentive every year to compete, right? It's not like I'm just going to sit as the grandmaster and not have to play games, right? So what are some of the downsides in this kind of system? Because we there's been a few conversations that it's too complicated and like people don't know the scores, but this is actually a very old system. I think the original ELO system was created in like the 60s or the 50s, maybe even before that. And then obviously it's been kind of advanced later with like a glyco system, a glico, I don't even know if I'm saying that right at this point. So, and that's like a newer kind of improved version of it. So, and all the math and all the calculation, all the algorithms and all the formulas, that's all very publicly available. And obviously, if we did implement a system like this, we would have like, you could either go look it up yourself, or we would have something that, on wherever the site this information is hosted, I'm sure that information would be available. So it's not like you just don't, like, unlike the ITC, you actually don't know how they calculate points. It's proprietary. So this would be actually very open system as far as knowledge. But one of the other things is and one of the other criticisms is that it encourages players who have high ratings to not attend events, or they look at an event where there aren't good players and they decide it's not worth it, because for them, if they get a loss, say for instance at someone that's much lower, the risk for them to lose a game and drop in a lot of points is not worth them attending events. So what do you say to those people, and how do we counteract for that?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple things to look at. Other things you can do is using that rating system to make sure that the tournaments are seeded. So they're actually, rather than randomly pairing somebody in the first round, that they're going to play those top players early on. So it's worth it they're going to be, even if they take an early loss, the tournament's not completely derailed for them. And but also you can also put limits. So you must have an ELO rating of this much to attend this event. You can also do it the other way. It says we're going to do a lighter event. This is for new players only. So if you have over 1,000 points, sorry,
You're
your ELO
gatekeeping,
rating is
Eric.
too high for this
And I
event.
just had a
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm
But
joking
it's
because
something
I
we're
had a
seeing.
long rant about gatekeeping yesterday. So um,
Yeah. So the other thing that comes up, you mentioned ELO is not proprietary. Interesting enough, Magic the Gathering came up with a
yes, of
proprietary
course they
ELO
did.
system.
WotC at work.
It's pretty simple. Yeah, it's the Planeswalker system, and all it simply is, okay, what were your scores this weekend? And they would enter them. Did you not play this weekend? No, I had something to do. Then you lose points. So the point is, you had to show up on a regular basis. So let's take an example, another hot topic. A Broken Codex comes out. I go to 6 events as fast as I can, bang it out. The FAQ comes out. My army is completely nerfed. Now I have to sit back. You can't do that with that system because every week I don't
Right.
play, my score goes down again. So you're re-incentivized to get
Right.
back out and
So
play.
there's a few questions from chat. A few people are asking if your data will be available, and I was like, I'll ask Eric. I don't know. He sounds like he's put a lot of work into it, so I don't want to say yes. But there's a few people are curious about the
Yeah,
data.
it's pretty well.
And then there's a comment here
Um,
that says events need players to get numbers to be GG, and Elo minimums would kill them. And I think my argument, and that's kind of what I was saying at the start, is I think we need to get away from this mentality that bigger is always better. Like, why do they need to be GTs? Why does every event need to be a GT, right? There's nothing wrong with a 20-person event or a 30-person event or a 40-person event. And I think there's this like mentality that, like, no, events are only worthwhile if they're massive. And the nice thing about an ELO rating is that it doesn't incentivize size of an event. And it doesn't mean that an event is only worthwhile going to if it's a certain size, which is, I think, what Lojax is talking about in chat. So I actually think what I like about the ELO system is that I can go to some RTTs or some smaller events, and they can still have good players there, right? But I don't feel like I'm wasting my time because I've already got my 3 RTTs in the current system with ITC. And if there's good players at that event, which ideally, if small events are like, if you're playing potentially against other good players, like there's possibility. And even if you don't play against, like if you play against medium players, your score still goes up, just obviously not by a massive amount, right? So I think the idea, and obviously, like we still want a variety of size events because I love going to the LVO. I love the fact that there's like 1,000 Warhammer players. I love going to Nova where there's like 300. So we're not saying don't do large events, and that obviously more large events means more better players to beat. But what I think it does is it pulls the focus away from numbers, and we've seen so much. How many times have we seen people the fake player situation? People submarining, right? So it gets rid of the whole concept of submarining, right? And for those of you who don't know, submarining is basically trying to score low in your first 3 to 5 games and either just barely win, and basically just barely win so that you can avoid playing better players, right? And then we've also seen lots of events where there's been drama with like fake players trying to pump up numbers, fake numbers in order to become a GT status. So it kind of gets rid of a lot of that, right? As far as I'm concerned.
It does. And there's also, I don't know how sustainable the current system is. We talked about it will kill the mid-sized tournaments. Honestly, a lot of them are on life support already. And I can give you 4 years ago, when I ran my GT here locally, 54% of my attendees were from out of state. Simply because they knew there were only so many GTs. Like you gave the example at the beginning of the show, there are 20 events in my area. I need this many GTs to get my max score. I will do the 5-hour drive, and it's a great event. I'll do it. Now that there's a GT around the corner, or what's promised to be a GT, I'm not going to drive 5 hours when I can drive 20 minutes. And they show up and they go, like I said, there's 4 fake players. The scores get reduced, get expunged later because it wasn't an event. Those are coming more and more often. And the difference between running an event with 16 players cost-wise as opposed to a 50, 60-person event is, a factor of 10. So a lot of these players are, the TOs, they have to pay that money up front to the venue. So they are hoping people will show up and they can make it back on the ticket prices. So that is a big issue.
Yeah, so in the chat, there's some people making the opposite argument, which is that the space to house 20, 30 people is about the same money to house 80 to 100, which I vehemently disagree with. I tried to rent a space for 8 people for like a work meeting, and it was like $1,000. And to rent a space like for 16 people, it was like 5 times that. Like it's generally the size of your venue is proportional to the cost scales pretty quickly. It's not like your 10. Now obviously if the minimum size is like doing a 5-person event in a space that holds 10, right? Obviously there's gonna be break points where when you have to upgrade to the next size of room or size of venue, where at the start of that break point it's gonna be more expensive than filling the room. Obviously that's gonna happen with any size of event, right? You always want to fill the space that you have. But I wouldn't agree with the argue that like you would never book a space for 30 people that actually fits 100 and that they're similar in price. That just doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. Maybe in like America it does. In Canada that's not how, especially in Vancouver where space is at a premium. Large conference rooms like that are extremely expensive. We're usually going out into the suburbs. Like most of the GTs here are in like suburbs and near the airport. Like we're not talking things like that are happening in town. Like you're talking a 45-minute drive just to get to a larger event that can house like 100 people or 200 people. So is that your experience as someone that's run events?
Absolutely, and sometimes you get lucky. Like if you're a member of a association that has a large space. My first GT was ran in a nursing home. No joke, because we had this large area that no one ever used. So I got the space for roughly my max was 44 players. Yeah. I got it for $500. So I could keep doing it. It was impossible to find. I lost 8 players because I couldn't find the venue. So one of the things I had to do to increase player participation is lunch was included because they had a kitchen attached to the place. Now, going to a hotel ballroom, you're looking, depending on your area, $3,000 to $5,000 for everything involved. Also, remember that's not just a space. Expectation is you have a mat on every table. So for every 2 players, a mat, even at discount, the TO discount that they promised, is between $50 and $60 depending on your purveyor. So that's $30 per player per game. So let's say 6 That's still right there, $5
Mm-hmm.
a player just in mats
Right.
that you're talking about. So all these extra costs, terrain, even if you make it
Which is
yourself,
a lot of work.
and
Building
some of
like
you
30, 40
guys
tables
mentioned,
of terrain and storing it and buying materials. That's like you're adding hundreds of hours to your as a TO that you're not getting paid for, right? And yeah, and look, I know we could probably have a whole episode on like the like tournaments and stuff, and so I don't want to get too distracted. I guess the last thing I will say is to your point, shout out to the guys at the WCP in Vancouver. I remember my very first event with them. One of my very first tournaments was in the basement of like a Legion hall, which is very common because they're quite cheap. Those Legion halls, they sold like $3 pints or whatever, and it was like 8 tables like in a basement. Like that was the kind of venues that we played games in because that was all that we could afford, right? So okay, so yeah, and I don't want to focus too much on the cost of running a tournament because I think that's a whole episode on whether and I've said this before that tickets should be more expensive, TOs should pay themselves, judges should be paid. Like these are all things the standard of demand from players these days is totally insane. Like everyone wants perfect like picturesque like stream tables, and then they want to pay $30 for their ticket. You know what I'm saying? So it's like there's a huge like a disconnect between the cost and time investment required to just run a 30-person or 40-person event and the actual cost of the tickets. And obviously that scales the more expensive the events get as well. So that's a whole episode. But going back to the ELO ratings, um, so what do you think some of the, I guess, hangups are right now as far as implementing system? Because as far as I'm concerned, and I'm just being honest with you guys, um, I like this kind of system because it's more honest about where your ability is. And for me, the ITC, and look, you're talking to someone that finished second in the ITC, and a lot of people, and I'm just gonna be very honest with you because I'm always honest with the listeners. A lot of people, I go on podcasts from like people in England, and they're like, "Oh, one of the best players in the world." I'm like, I'm not one of the best players in the world, not even close. And just because I finished high in the ITC doesn't mean I am one of the best players in the world. What it means is I won a few events, right? I got good. I run some good size events, and I think I run that year like 8 or 9. Obviously I won Adepticon. I won a few other large majors, like 100+ person majors, right? But those were slightly local, and I know there's players in Europe. I know there's players in the States, especially not in Florida. There's no good players in Florida, but in other places of the States that where there's excellent players, and in England, obviously, especially Spain, Poland, like these are places where they're real powerhouses. And I always feel silly when people are like, "Oh, you're one of the best players." I'm like, "No, guys, like I think I'm a pretty good player, and I think that I can hold my own against most players. I beat Nick, I beat John, small flex, but I beat all those guys in games before, but I would never be like, especially now that I'm one of the best players in the world, like it's just not even a thing, right? And I'd be embarrassed if to even say that, right? And so what I like about the ELO system is that like it gives you really a true measure of your player ability, and ultimately I don't the my problem with the ITC scores is it's very much it's almost like a popularity. It's like a event popularity contest. It's like who can go to the most events and score and play in as many events as possible to give them the most chances of scoring high and getting the most points. Right? It almost feels like um it's like I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but it doesn't feel honest, right? It doesn't feel like it's a true measure of your ability. And I feel like it creates a lot of entitlement, right? Like where people are like, oh, like I'm the number fourth in the ITC, I should beat the number 30th player, when actually that 30th player is like 10 times better than you.
it reminds me kind of like when to talk about in professional sports, the Hall of Fame votes, the guy who was explosive and amazing for 5 seasons, or the guy that was above
Right.
average for 15 seasons.
Moneyball.
So he compiled a ton of stats. It was
I said Moneyball. We
great.
want the
What's that?
Moneyball 40K.
Yeah, not the Moneyball. So, well, he hit 500 home runs. Yeah, but it
Right.
took him 20 years to do it.
Yeah.
It's not. This other guy, 70 home runs in the season, and so that's kind of where sometimes the current system falls apart. Is where I came in top 10
Mhm.
11 times. Good. The top 10 is still a big performance, but who'd you play? And just because they were larger events, certain events definitely draw a tougher crowd, and you want to show that I can, truly show if you're really the best, I can beat the best. By
Right.
here's the
Now,
example.
here's a
Does
question I
that.
have. So let's say we're in a tournament. Let's say it's a 2-day GT. How do we actually pair people?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously win loss is important. It's something that we look at right now. So does it go win? Does it still go win loss and then second by your rating? Does it go by win loss battle points then your rating? Does your rating factor in at all with the pairings, or is that more just something that you kind of get at the end? So does your ELA rating affect at all how you're paired in a specific event, or is it more just there to kind of track how you go up and down? Because I would imagine that there is some tournament we could have where you're basically matched by ELA rating, right? Where it's like the top two play each other, and the next top two, and the next top two, and then after that, everything's kind of reshuffled, right, based on the changes. And then it's like now the next top two, or that obviously haven't played each other because you don't want people those kind of play each other, and people come up and going up and down, and throughout the tournament, and then by the end of the tournament, you're kind of playing people very close to your skill level. Whereas right now we're playing win loss draw, so that means I could have two bad players, like both like two bad players play, one of them wins, and then two really good players win and one of them wins, and then those players end up playing each other, and there's a huge disparity in their skill level. So how does the ELA rating factor into pairings in a tournament? How would that kind of coexist with the current tournament system?
So that was a great example because there's three ways you can do it. So there are certain chess groups that just ignore it. They do Swiss pairing just like we do. And they definitely they see that round one, that random pairing being, they call the round of death because you don't know who you're going to get. There are other groups that use ELO rating. They rank you by that. And ELO rating can be calculated game by game or just how you did on the end of the tournament. So Friday when you showed up, here's your ELO rating. We wait till Monday morning, see what the tournament results are, then recalculate it. So there's two ways to do it. I did it the second way simply because I wanted to get this done in time for the show. The third option is a modified Swiss pairing system called the McMahon system. And this is another chess player and also Go player came up with this. And what he does is they seed you in the beginning. So what that means is, so let's say you have an extremely high ELO rating, or just you think he's a better player. And you may give them a win in round zero. So before the tournament even started, a couple players already have a win, a couple players have a tie. These other guys who are wooden spoons get a loss right off the bat. So so when they actually do the Swiss pairings on turn one, the winners are going to play the winners, and then they start. So you don't need 8, 9, 12 rounds to get a true winner because you have such a large size. The top players are already playing each other from day one. And if they take a loss on round one, they already had a win in the bank, so they can keep going. So it's a great way to get, if you have more than 64 players, you need 6 rounds to determine a true winner. This is a great way to reduce that. So it reduces your costs and also from player strain. There's not a lot of players out there who want to be playing 9 rounds of 40K over 3 days.
So, okay, and then can you just correct me if I'm wrong, but I know there's also certain, I think one of the benefits of a kind of mixed system like that, and I could be getting it wrong here, is that I could potentially lose my first game and still end up winning the event. Because it's not like I think in Magic it's like that, where basically like you could be like 8-3 and go to day 2 essentially, like the next kind of the finals, because it kind of looks at who are the different people you played in. It doesn't really care which rounds you won stuff in, because right now the ITC doesn't only reward, like it's under the theory that more points, like you get a bit of a bonus to your points based on when you actually get your first loss, right? But like my first opponent in the LVO last time I went, I actually lost my first game. He ended up going to like the top 8, or I think the top 16. So he was like incredibly good, and then I ended up winning all my games. So like I ended up like, that was something that I was like, oh well, that's just like game of death essentially, right? I get the game of death, and so is that something that we could look into, where potentially your top finishers aren't necessarily undefeated, where it's actually just the people that have accumulated the most points? Like how would we, like, I guess my question is like, is there a way to actually reward people in it during the event that had the hardest win path versus the most wins, like who had do you know what I'm saying? Like,
I do. So yes and no. So that's why I like the McMahon system the best, because it sets up the advantages for having a higher ELO score up front, but then you got a play. So could you lose 3 games and still win the event and be higher than somebody who's undefeated? No. You still have to, but it's not the one and done system that we've got now. You take a loss, you have a slim chance of making that shadow round in LVO at this point. So same idea. So yes, you could take a loss and still be in the running to win the event because you had a stronger win path, or that you beat tougher players to get to the top. Yes, you could. Even if you don't win the event, if you use the current ITC system based off of attendance, you get a better chance of being in the top section and getting those more points, as opposed to, like I said, if you go to a local RTT with a 16-person event, 6 players are going to go 2-1. You want the best players at the top of the rankings, not just the guys who racked up a bunch of battle
Right.
points during their games. If they play tougher players, they'll be more incentivized to be 2, 3, 4th place. They'll get more ITC points.
Right.
But yes, they all
So,
work out.
okay, so I mean, what are we missing here? Because from everything that like me and you were talking about, it feels like this is a superior way to rank players. But like, why do you think there's not a widespread like movement here to actually implement a system like this? Because I've heard, I've heard Reese talk about it. I've heard, I think Pablo's brought up on Chapter Tactics. I think some of the other people, obviously the guys at the WTC, like I've never really had or heard any sort of effort or push or movement to actually implement a system like this. So why do you think that is? Like, why do you think is holding this back?
Fear is the biggest one. I've heard Reese say specifically it's too complicated, and 40K is a game of chance where chess is not. For that, I say ELO is not strictly chess. I mean, they're using it in professional sports. So you want to talk about randomness. Green Bay Packers versus the Chicago Bears in American football. Are they playing in Green Bay in January, or are they playing in a neutral site in a dome somewhere in
Right.
Atlanta?
Who's hurt? Who's
Very
injured?
different
Right? Like,
variables.
so your star quarterback is Aaron Rodgers. Is he in the Green Bay Packers, or am I really bad at football? But he used to be, right?
Well, for
See,
now,
I know
yes.
some things about football, very little, but sometimes.
But he's
So yeah, it's like your quarterback is he's like Eric's like, okay, go away, Jim. You're Canadian, doesn't know anything. Anyways, but like my point is like in sports, there is also chance. Like, I mean, there's a chance that I'm hungover, right? Which is actually very high sometimes, and that could affect my gameplay, right? So these are all things that like are kind of exterior forces. Yes, it's not a game of, and even in chess, someone has to. There's a, I don't know if it's a coin flip or how they decide. Someone gets to go first or second, and there's usually a chance as to there's a chance involved there, right? So there's always a little bit of chance involved and a little
absolutely.
bit of randomness.
Yeah. The second thing to look at it, it's too difficult. Well, Gloomhammer uses the Glyco system rank factions. They seem to get the hang of it. What's the
Right.
problem? So it's like he's doing it by hand. Why not? I mean, like I said, it only took me 3 hours to do 17 events. So that it is too hard. I think when you see the formula on paper, it's like, oh God, PTSD from calculus in high school. It really isn't that hard, especially with the and then anyone who wants to try it at home. There's a constant, so I was using 40 as the K value. It'll make more sense but basically that determines how many points you get going from one point to the other. So.
All right, so then what's next for this? Because like I don't know, I guess this is something that I feel would like, and I obviously I talked to Val last week about 40K as an esport, which is a really interesting topic. I've talked, there's been lots of talk about bringing competitive 40K to the next level as far as like competitiveness. And again, guys, I'm talking about very competitive tournament 40K. I'm not talking about like you don't need to calculate your ELO score playing your buddy at your garage. Like no one's advocating for that. What we're saying is at like competitive level, tournament level. Do you think this is something where like I guess in my heart of hearts, I don't ever see Games Workshop wanting to take it that far. It seems like this, like we can barely get them to acknowledge that tournaments exist and that to give us FAQ. So for them to ever release a ranking system like this feels like a step, like in 1,000 years maybe, when the sun dies out or something like that. But like at this point, it's not something that I rely on Games Workshop for. So is there something that can be done, or like people are asking me why I don't just set this up? I'm like, guys, I don't even know how the system works, and like I seriously don't have the like time or effort or energy. But I do think like and maybe this is a conversation with some of the stats keepers in the community, Cough Peter the Falcon. Maybe there's a way to create like an app, or even pull the raw data from like the ITC Battles app or like the BCP, where we could actually just kind of create a parallel system. Maybe that's kind of the first step. What do you think the first step is to kind of get people to adopt this more, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a superior system. And as much as I like the ITC system and I still want it to stay around, I don't want it to go away, I also want to know, I want both. Like, I want them to kind of run in parallel.
So I think the first thing is, if you're expecting Games Workshop to do it, I ask why. Because they don't run the ITC. You mentioned Peter the Falcon; he does that all of his own. So if I was Games Workshop, you guys keep doing what you do. It doesn't cost me anything, and it promotes my game.
Well, my answer to that, and I'll say this quickly, is this: we know that Games Workshop is thinking about getting back into events in some capacity or another. And we know that Games Workshop likes to have ultimate complete control of everything. They're control freaks. We know that they quashed the like many different scenarios. Like they quashed a lot of the like alternate ways to play the game with like the ITC missions. So they're very much about playing their way. Now, if Games Workshop ever just like, look, I look at leaderboards for like League of Legends, for Warcraft. I used to play MMOs, and there's like PvP leaderboards. There's all sorts of leaderboards that were on the company websites. Like when I was like EverQuest or like WoW, like you can go to Blizzard and you can look at PvP leaderboards. So there's already like companies that promote competition within their own ecosystems, right? Whether it's League of Legends or Dota or whatever. There's leaderboards. StarCraft, you can go get you get rated in StarCraft. So we see that there are companies that have that when they're trying to push their game to a competitive like place, they see that there's an incentive to have some sort of achievement system, ranking system, whatever. And obviously, I don't think that Games Workshop is going to go out and use the ITC ranking score, because that's not theirs. So where I see that, why I see them ever thinking about doing this is, A, if they ever decide they want to do some sort of competitive ranking, I would say that this seems to me a similar system, or something like where like WotC did, where they took WotC is Wizards of the Coast, by the way. If I always say WotC, but it's Wizards of the Coast for those that you don't know what I'm talking about. Did and take the system and actually adapt it for their own uses. So that's where I see them actually being open to something like this, which is like them being like, hey, we want to have, you can go to gamesworkshop.com, look at the competitive 40K circuit, go to the leaderboards, and you can look at the top Drukhari player, the top Eldar player, the top XYZ player. You can also look at the top general player, right? You can look at the top teams, and they have rankings, and these are all based on this system. That's kind of where I guess I would say that GW could potentially be involved. And I don't think that's that crazy. Like, I know it seems crazy right now, but 5 years ago, if you told me that Games Workshop would have a community site and Mike Brandt as this like events guy and all this stuff, I would have said you're crazy. So who knows what another 5 years gives us, right?
Absolutely. But we're impatient. We've been waiting for this for a long time. Like I said, I've been doing this since 3rd edition, before I was married, and we just celebrated 20 years of marriage. So it's been a while, you know, and it's not hard. So that's something. Now, you mentioned the statisticians. I overheard Peter saying on another show that he's been working on an an ELO system that would rank players. So it's not hard to do. I think in order to get, I think we would start with somebody doing it, showing how it works, get people to understand it's not a bad thing. We said fear is the worst part. I can show you, hey, this is what happened. Here's how it works. So like the gentleman asked, am I going to share my stats? One of the things I'd rather do is show how I came up with these stats. You can see how it works. And that way go, oh, I could buy into that. And like I said, it can work great. You don't have to do it in your garage, but your local meta, your local town, it could definitely, because you got to remember, 60% of the tournament goers are going to go 3-2 or 2-3. What is their experience like? They don't want feel bad experiences. Pair them against people that are like them in skill level. They'll have a good time. So then, rather than getting don't know what that is or don't understand the game at their level, so that makes it more fun. So I think it is a win for everyone involved in that. And in terms of the math, it's, again, there's plenty of apps out there that get it done for you. So it's one.
Well, maybe if there's any app developers out there, they can. I'm pretty sure there's apps that probably already exist that do this, right?
There are, and actually, I even seen there were some pre-made Excel spreadsheets that did it for you. So that was like so I just did my little data entry and made it happen. So yeah, it's out there. It's not hard. But again, it's that acceptance and figuring out, okay, where do I stand? Now you still have that. You need that cross-pollination. That's where the big events come from. Either the the old days of 5th and 6th edition where East Coast never met West Coast. So it was always a kind of a rivalry type thing. A couple guys venture the Nova, and then a couple guys come over to DAO. By getting more of these people together, it gives you more robust data, and because they actually play head to head.
Yeah, like I know I'm gonna dream a dream here, but how amazing would it be if like if you look at the IDC Battles app, right, which is a great app, and obviously BCP is a great app that we use. IDC Battles takes in everything, takes in secondaries, puts in like your scores round to round, primaries, army faction, all this kind of stuff. Imagine imagine the Games Workshop app could take all that information in, and then over the course of a period of time, Games Workshop actually could see the game data of their own game and see, hey, look, we have certain factions that are overperforming or having very high, or there's certain secondaries that no one ever takes, or there's certain missions where no one scores primary or everyone scores max primary, etc. Like imagine how much better they could be at building a great game if they actually had that information. Like it's like I feel like they could instantly improve in 1,000 ways just by having that data. And I know we kind of farm that data to ourselves and then go try to push it on GW and take it. But like, how amazing would it be if Games Workshop could actually just had that data? Just like when you look at an online game, right? Online games, almost every computer game is built around data collection from that stuff. So they can look at time played, clicks. They can look at players, which avatars were selected. They can look at which maps are played. All that data is at their disposal, their fingertips. And then they can use that data to help balance the game, to help make it more fair and more fun. And so in my dream, like society of future, which doesn't exist, Games Workshop also had that data, but for competitive. And obviously if you're not playing a competitive game, you could log your game as like a like a narrative game or a non-tournament game, just like a pickup game or whatever, so that they could differentiate between competitive games and non-competitive games, so that for tournaments and non-tournaments, whatever you want to do, right? Like the sky's the limit here. But how amazing would it be if Games Workshop actually had that data, and they could actually both provide the data to the player base, but also use that data to actually make the game better. Like that for me, like it's 2021, and I know that Games Workshop's notoriously slow to get with the times, but that for me would be like so next level if they implemented something like that. It would be just absolutely amazing, and I think the game would be better for it. And when I look at fucking like, look, I don't play console. I haven't owned a console since Sega Genesis, but I see how much people fiend for, and I have Steam. Obviously, I play a lot of games on Steam, and like various, and like Steam is like, oh, like here's an achievement, here's an achievement, here's an achievement. People love that shit. People love like achievements. Like that's just like it's like, oh, they want their achievements. And so if Games Workshop did something like that, where it's like you could literally get achievements, play 10 Drukhari players, here's your achievement. Play 10 missions of this mission, here's your achievement point, right? Like Games Workshop could put a system like that together with an app and basically digitize the game in that way. And I think it'll actually make the game more popular and more exciting, because people are like, oh, I want to go play 5 Crusade games because I get my fucking achievement point, right? And I'm like that right. Is like, I just think about the potential there, and I'm like, it gets me excited, and it's like, oh, can you guys just do it, please?
Yeah, because you think back in the old days, if you went to a GW event, one of their games days, they sold exclusive models. Now imagine you're playing. I'll take the Crusade. We're not even talking competitive play. I'm playing Crusade and I get a unique requisition for my army. That'd be so cool, and I can only get it through the app. And there's only going to be available for this month, and there's only going to be so many of those given out in the world. So you got to get your games in early in the month. That would be great. That'd be awesome, and I don't have to keep track of it. I don't need a league manager to keep track of who did what. It'd be so cool. Like and like you get the data back.
I literally have an app on my phone that like tracks beers. So like when I'm at a because if I go like a brewery tour, right, I can literally enter the beers that I drink, and it'll like not only store the beers and I can rate the beers, but then after drinking like certain types of beers, or once you had your 10th sour, you get achievement points in an app that tracks your beer drinking. Like literally that exists. So if that can exist for beer drinking, it can for sure exist for Games Workshop. And that's the thing. Like I could lie to the app and say I'm drinking all these beers. So my one hesitancy with like having it tied to any sort of like financial reward is, oh, well, people just game it and like I can just enter. I played 30 games against whatever. But people, the thing is like you can do that right now, and with a lot of achievements you can kind of game them, and ultimately it cheapens it for yourself. But because it's more just like a badge of honor, I think like so that would be the one thing, right? But
well, you could do that. It's event when you go to an event, and you get the event code when you get your ticket when you arrive at the event. So that's another thing. So again, because if you look at the business models, like one reason why Toys R Us went out of business, huge stores, all they're doing is warehousing stuff that Amazon's selling for cheaper. And their model to get them out of bankruptcy was more demonstrations, more on-site. So you come in to play the toys and go, "Ooh, I will buy it now." That's the kind of with all these new GWs. There's a new one open in Los Angeles. There's the one outside of Houston. Come in, play the game, and here's what you get special achievements when you come to these events. By the way, we will partner with larger events like LVO, like Nova, like Adepticon. So you want to go to those. So it's more than just the preview show. There's a reason to go from a gaming standpoint.
Right.
That'd be great.
All right. Any final thoughts on this topic? Anything that you feel was left unsaid, or do you feel like we have a pretty good grasp on that? You know, everything's been said.
I think we have a good grasp. Yeah, and when you look at it, you mentioned the glycosis. We didn't quite get into it. They're all variations of the same thing. There are definitely some tweaks to do. Things, as I mentioned, Magic the Gathering Planewalker system was just a slight tweak. And
have a Games Workshop.
All I say is try. Yeah, it's all it was because they could, trademark it. So that's all it came down to it. It's benefit. I mean, it from all levels. This is not just a tournament thing. This is something that can help all players, and it's great to see where you stand at this point and not just where you showed up. It's not a participation book anymore.
All right, guys, that's the episode. If you have any thoughts on this kind of system, please make sure to leave comments down below or on any of the things. And once again, make sure to like and subscribe if you guys are enjoying the content. And if you don't enjoy the content, then tell me and I'll probably ignore you, but I'll like to hear from you anyway. So with that said, Eric, thank you so much for being on the stream. Next week, again, guys, on Tuesday, we have Rob Symes to talk about the ethics of sponsorships. And then don't forget to tune in to the Best Overall show this Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific, and Competitive Corner next Monday as well. So with that said, my name is Jim Vessel. This is Politics and Plastic. Have a great week.